Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Vladimir Dutin. It is caucus day in Iowa, where the 2020 Democratic candidates are making their final pushes to become the next president of the United States. The latest CBS News Battleground Tracker has former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders tied in the high-stakes race.
However, former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Elizabeth Warren could also win some delegates tonight. CBSN will have extensive coverage throughout the day and night of the first-in-the-nation caucuses. We have a team of correspondents and experts on hand to break it all down for you. But we begin with CBS This Morning co-anchor Tony Dokoupil, who is following the action from Des Moines.
The middle class does well. Everybody does well.
We're going to do this and we're going to win.
As Democrats vying for the White House crisscrossed Iowa, so did we.
Women win. Let's get this done.
First stop, an overflowing rally for Senator Elizabeth Warren. We spoke with her backstage about how the economic pie is distributed.
We got some free pie here. Free pie.
An issue we covered last week with a real pie.
How many pieces of the pie would you put on the middle class?
You had it exactly right. You showed how it is that the wealthy have so much pie. When I do a wealth tax, it's not to hand out money, it's to make the investments.
How do you like your chances?
Oh, I like them.
But shortly after Warren took the stage,
We've got a short drive to make it to the Buttigieg event on time. Let's go.
38-year-old Mayor Pete Buttigieg is the youngest Democrat in the field.
How do you define victory tomorrow? First place only?
I'll leave it to the pundits to set up the goalpost, but what I know
So
is
you're leaving the possibility that victory could be something other than first place.
Well, we definitely need to have a strong showing here because this is our chance to show and not just tell our ability to get folks out to the polls and mount the organization that is eventually going to go on and defeat Donald Trump.
I do have a nickname I want to give him. Former President Donald Trump.
Meanwhile, attacks on President Trump echoed across the Hawkeye state.
In America, the president is not king. The law is king.
We got to go. We're going to go try to see Bernie Sanders.
It is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump.
Thank you.
We ended up at a Des Moines bar on Super Bowl Sunday filled with Bernie Sanders supporters.
Our job together is to create the highest turnout in the history of the Iowa caucus.
The Vermont senator predicted victory, then sped off before we could catch him.
Better luck next time, Tony Dokoupil
Yeah, right.
reporting for us. Now let's bring in CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's also following the latest in Des Moines.
Good morning. Well, we're less than 12 hours away from those caucus doors opening tonight here in Iowa, but that doesn't mean that voters have actually made up their minds. We talked to a lot of likely caucus goers over the weekend to find out how they are making their final decision. The most sought-after people in Iowa in the final hours before the caucuses aren't the presidential candidates.
Every 4 years, everything begins here in Iowa.
Go in on Monday evening and caucus for us.
Thank you, Iowa. They are the undecided voters. So who are you going to caucus for?
I'm not quite decided yet.
I go from one to the other to the other. I'm just very on the fence. I keep kind of changing my mind.
After months of campaigning in college gymnasiums, school cafeterias, and event halls around the Hawkeye state, candidates are making a last-ditch effort to persuade the nearly 2/3 of Iowa Democrats who are still making up their minds.
So how are you going to make this decision?
I don't know. I'm hoping by going to each of their rallies this weekend, I'll have a better idea.
And many told CBS News over the weekend they plan to be swayed on caucus night.
If Andrew Yang is not viable, I would then caucus for Elizabeth Warren.
For candidates competing in Iowa, sometimes being a voter's second choice can be just as good as first. Supporters can pick a backup if their first preference doesn't attract 15% of the people in the room. But even those who haven't yet picked a candidate are united around one goal.
We have to have a very viable candidate that can defeat Trump.
You want to make the right choice. You want to vote for somebody that you like and that you support, but ultimately you want somebody who's going to end up in the White House.
And that means when we get into that caucus room tonight, there's going to be a lot of jockeying going around. So stay tuned with us all day to see how voters are continuing to make up their minds. But we're very lucky this morning to be joined by Henderson. She's the news director for Radio Iowa. No one better to discuss these issues and where the state of the race stands with you. So thanks so much for being with us today.
Good morning.
We just talked about our Battleground Tracker showing Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden neck and neck in this tight race. Where do you see the race standing at this point?
You mentioned all these horse race similarities. It could be a photo finish. Indeed, we have 4 candidates who are very competitive here. And it's anybody's game at this point. You know, turnout is everything. Iowa had a competitive gubernatorial primary in 2018. About 180,000 people turned out for that primary. It's expected there will be far more turnout tonight for this presidential caucus episode.
What's really interesting about this cycle compared to last is that we have something we've never seen before, which is impeachment, making sure that some of these candidates have to be back in Washington, D.C. today. So they hopped on planes last night to go back to Washington. They're hopping on planes tonight to come back to Des Moines. What impact have you seen on the ground here in Iowa, talking to voters, talking to candidates, about what kind of impact impeachment has had on this race?
Well, it gave an advantage to the 2 candidates here who were able to make their case in person. Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg even threw a line into his campaign speech, "I'm here to make my case to you eye to eye." But the candidates who were stuck in D.C. took sort of extraordinary lengths. For instance, Amy Klobuchar had a couple of telephone town hall meetings in which she, according to her campaign, talked to 10,000 people on the phone, trying to connect that way. Elizabeth Warren is doing that this morning with folks in Iowa, having a telephone town hall meeting. They've flown back as soon as they can. Indeed, Elizabeth Warren arrived here Friday night at 10:30 to a jam-packed brew pub here and talked to her supporters there. So once they've gotten on the ground, they've really hit it running.
We've also seen Bernie Sanders on the ground here, surging in these polls. Where do you think his campaign stands right now? Can we expect him to do well here tonight?
Yes, we can. He's in a good position. He has a good ground game, and you can't just discount the fact that he has been running in Iowa since late 2014. His first visit here was in December of 2014. Obviously, he started early in 2015, actually sort of before former Secretary Clinton got into the race. And so he had people here, key supporters. He has some interesting interest groups who really rallied behind his cause. And they've been working hard to reach out to retail workers who are very interested in his Fight for 15 message. So they've been reaching out to Latino voters. There's a growing number of Latinos in Iowa. In fact, in the past decade, the number of Latinos living in Iowa has increased threefold.
I think that's a really important point because there's been a lot of criticism of the Iowa caucus by Democrats for not really representing the Democratic Party. You've seen some surrogates out here talking about that, some criticisms of why Iowa goes first. What have you heard among those arguments for why Iowa should remain in this position?
Well, obviously we hear them every 4 years, and what I always tell people when they say, will Iowa be first in 2024, or whenever that question comes up, is that it depends who is elected president. If Democrats lose the White House in 2020, I think there will be the sort of autopsy that Republicans did after they lost in 2012, and there will be a reevaluation and perhaps even a reordering of the state contest to choose the Democratic nominee. If the Democrat wins the White House and they were somebody who was successful in Iowa or had a good experience, if you will, I think Iowa will be preserved as the first in the nation.
And in the final seconds we have left, any last-minute predictions or anything that you're watching for tonight as we head into the caucus?
It's fascinating. I'm going to be looking at turnout. I've been looking at voter registration numbers for the past year. They haven't really ticked up. My suspicion is that there are going to be a number of Iowans who show up at the polls tonight and become first-time voters.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Okay, Henderson, we really appreciate it. Vlad and Marie, back to you.
All right, Caitlin, thank you very much. Kay as well. Thank you.